Welcome to Holy Heartbeats. My name is Nathan, and I narrate Christ-centered testimonies from all over the world. These testimonies include rapture and end-times visions, near-death experiences, encounters with angels and demons, God, Jesus, and even Satan himself. Please consider subscribing to my channel if you are fond of listening to these types of stories, and let me know what you think about these testimonies in the comments section below. Furthermore, for those who want to share their personal testimonies, visions, and revelations from God, you can send us your own stories at holyheartbeats7@gmail.com. I will be very honored to read your testimony, which may inspire, edify, and encourage a lot of people in their personal journey of faith with the Lord Jesus Christ. Hi, Nathan. If you can still remember me, I sent you several emails before exposing Queen Elizabeth and the Windsor Castle. I'm so sorry to know that those videos were taken down unjustly. The powers that be don't want people to know the truth, so to help you avoid more trouble with the red platform, I will share this article using a less graphic language. I am still hoping that you will share my research with your audience. Thank you. In this story, the Vatican's historical struggles with allegations of corruption and misconduct take center stage, highlighting a long-standing issue that has profoundly affected its reputation and moral authority. Over time, the Church has faced damning accusations of shielding clergy members implicated in egregious acts, a pattern that raises serious questions about its commitment to justice and accountability. One recent incident from September 2017 underscores this troubling reality. A priest assigned to the Vatican Embassy in Washington, D.C., was implicated in a scandal involving the collection of inappropriate images of minors. Instead of facing justice in the United States, the priest was promptly recalled to Rome, effectively placing him beyond the reach of American law enforcement. Such actions inevitably cast doubt on the Vatican's willingness to address these issues transparently, fueling public concern about whether offenders are truly held accountable within the confines of Vatican jurisdiction. The Catholic Church, deeply intertwined with tradition and spiritual guidance, has simultaneously grappled with a far-reaching moral crisis. Over the last quarter century, revelations of widespread misconduct within its ranks have left an indelible stain on its legacy. The scope and scale of these revelations are staggering, with cases involving clergy members surfacing across the globe, shaking the foundations of trust and faith among millions of followers. Despite significant efforts to address this epidemic, the Church continues to face a torrent of headlines exposing new instances of abuse, making it clear that this crisis remains a defining challenge for the institution. Critics argue that these scandals represent more than isolated incidents, suggesting instead a systemic issue that the Church must confront decisively if it hopes to regain moral credibility and public trust. One particularly infamous case offers a window into the complexities of this issue, illustrating how power, influence, and institutional loyalty have often hindered justice. Marcial Maciel, a prominent figure within the Church, exemplifies this troubling dynamic. As the founder of the Legionaries of Christ, a Catholic order known for its significant financial contributions and influence, Maciel was both a revered leader and a deeply flawed individual. For over 50 years, he led a double life, managing to shield his personal transgressions from scrutiny even as allegations of abuse began to surface. His charisma and extraordinary fundraising abilities earned him favor among the Church hierarchy, which appeared reluctant to confront the mounting evidence against him. Maciel's story reflects a broader pattern within the Church, where figures of power and influence have often been protected at the expense of justice for victims. In this narrative, the tension between the Church's spiritual mission and its institutional failings becomes painfully evident. The handling of Maciel's case underscores a broader struggle within the Vatican to reconcile its duty to protect the vulnerable with the pressures of preserving its image and authority. Despite repeated warnings and credible allegations, Maciel continued to enjoy the support of high-ranking officials who seemingly prioritized his contributions to the Church's financial and political standing over the need to hold him accountable. This failure to act decisively against one of its most prominent members has come to symbolize the Church's broader challenges in addressing abuse within its ranks, highlighting the urgent need for systemic change and reform. In this story, Father Marcial Maciel, a man outwardly seen as gentle, devout, and wise, held a very different reality behind closed doors. Over the course of his long career within the Catholic Church, he is alleged to have preyed on countless young victims, with estimates ranging from 20 to over 100 children. At the age of 56, Maciel shifted focus slightly, telling a 19-year-old woman he wanted to settle down and start a family. This led to the birth of 3 children, 2 of whom were his biological sons. Tragically, his double life of deception and abuse did not end with his family, as even his own sons became victims of his predatory behavior. Outside of this family, Maciel also fathered a daughter, whose existence would only come to light when she reached adulthood. Maciel's surrogate wife, young and naive, believed his fabricated stories that he was often called away on CIA assignments, leaving her to care for their children while he attended to his broader schemes. Those schemes included targeting wealthy widows, such as the wives of influential figures like a former Venezuelan president and a prominent Mexican industrialist. Maciel used his charm and cunning to build a vast fortune for his movement, the Legionaries of Christ, which he founded in 1941. By 2004, the organization's wealth had grown to an astounding $650 million, thanks in large part to his relentless exploitation of vulnerable individuals. In 1990, Maciel's life took a sharp turn. By then, he was 70 years old and had achieved a meteoric rise within the Church, but his past began catching up with him as victims began to come forward. By 1997, 9 men who had been students in Maciel's seminary in Mexico had publicly accused him of abuse. One of the first to speak out was a young seminary student who, as an adult priest, felt compelled to confront the predator he had once trusted. Despite these brave accusations, the Vatican, under Pope John Paul II, refused to take decisive action, blinded by Maciel's success as a fundraiser and his influence within the Church. Even as allegations mounted, Pope John Paul II praised Maciel, calling him an efficacious guide to youth. Meanwhile, Cardinal Ratzinger, who oversaw investigations into clergy misconduct during this period, was aware of the allegations but continued to publicly support Maciel, recognizing his financial importance to the Church. Only after Ratzinger became Pope Benedict XVI and the weight of evidence became overwhelming did the Vatican finally act. In 2006, at the age of 86, Maciel was quietly removed from active ministry and instructed to live a reserved life of prayer and penitence. A year and a half later, his death put an end to the harm he inflicted on countless lives, leaving behind a legacy of betrayal and pain that the Church continues to grapple with. In this story, a father, deeply enmeshed in deception, had promised a generous inheritance for his secret family. However, true to his manipulative character, he failed to honor this promise. This betrayal led his biological son, who had suffered abuse, to attempt a settlement, demanding $26 million in exchange for silence. The request was refused by the Legion of Christ, escalating into a contentious lawsuit. Years later, the case, emblematic of the Church's historical mishandling of abuse scandals, resurfaced under the spotlight. When confronted about this troubling legacy, Pope Francis addressed it in 2015. He claimed limited knowledge of the situation while praising his predecessors for their judicious handling of the case. His response echoed a pattern that many critics argue characterizes the Church's approach, offering words without meaningful action. Pope Francis's declarations of zero tolerance for abuse victims and his public apologies have often been undercut by his decisions to reduce sentences for convicted offenders. Some have been reassigned to a lifetime of prayer and penance instead of being defrocked. In a particularly devastating case, an Italian criminal court convicted one such priest for crimes against 5 children as young as 12. Earlier that year, a survivor serving on the Vatican's Papal Commission on the Protection of Minors resigned in protest. The survivor criticized the Pope for dismissing the Commission's recommendations aimed at halting abuse. The decision highlighted a disconnect between the pontiff's stated commitment to reform and his actions. In one breath, Pope Francis promises accountability, while in another he emphasizes mercy for offenders. This perceived leniency sends a damaging message, leaving victims feeling betrayed and undermining the fight against abuse within the Church. Critics argue that the Pope's rhetoric often masks a lack of substantive change. His role, they suggest, is to placate those wounded by the Church's failings while creating the illusion of a tough new stand against abuse. To truly address the problem, reformers argue that an amendment to canon law, which has long prioritized secrecy and protection for offenders, is essential. Without such change, they claim, the Church's promises of reform will remain unfulfilled, perpetuating a cycle of harm and disillusionment. In this story, a unanimous recommendation emerges from those dedicated to addressing the long-standing issues of misconduct within the Church. The proposed solution is straightforward. Amend canon law to include the requirement that all Church personnel must report any suspected abuse to civil authorities. This simple yet crucial step has been adopted in many professions. In the United States, for instance, therapists, medical professionals, and educators have been legally obligated as mandated reporters of suspected child abuse for decades. Yet, despite repeated recommendations over the last 20 years from Catholic bishops' conferences in countries like Ireland, Great Britain, the United States, and Australia, the Vatican has consistently resisted making such a change. The power to enact this reform lies solely with the Pope. With a single signature, Pope Francis could amend canon law to mandate reporting abuse to civil authorities. However, instead of taking action, he continues to rely on empty promises and rhetoric. Critics argue that his refusal to implement such an obvious and necessary reform indicates a deeper problem within the Vatican's leadership. This inaction allows the status quo to persist, providing protection for individuals accused of misconduct. In 2014, even the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child urged Pope Francis to mandate reporting. The Pope, however, responded by claiming such a change would interfere with the independence of sovereign states, a justification many view as a weak excuse to avoid making a meaningful change. In this story, the reluctance to amend canon law reflects a larger, troubling reality. Critics claim that the Church's leadership is resistant to change because it is compromised by individuals who prioritize their own protection over justice. This reluctance mirrors broader patterns of impunity seen in other institutions and figures, from powerful politicians to influential public figures. The refusal to hold perpetrators accountable perpetuates cycles of harm and undermines trust in leadership. Another strategy used to avoid accountability, according to critics, involves local archdioceses diverting funds meant for victim settlements. Instead of compensating those who have suffered, these funds are often redirected to seemingly trivial expenses like maintaining church cemeteries. This tactic allows the Church to claim financial hardship or even bankruptcy, avoiding its responsibility to victims. All the while, the Vatican remains one of the wealthiest institutions in the world, sitting atop vast reserves of wealth. In this story, the Catholic Church is described by critics as one of the wealthiest and most powerful institutions in the world. Anti-Catholic activist Jack Chick claimed that the Church surpasses any single entity in terms of material wealth and property ownership, controlling a significant portion of the world's gold supply. While such claims are debated, what is clear is that the Church's vast resources and influence have led to complex legal maneuvers that hinder justice for victims of abuse. These tactics, critics argue, serve to delay court proceedings and ultimately deny rightful compensation to those harmed. In this story, one troubling example occurred in 2007 when Milwaukee Archbishop Timothy Dolan, under the guise of religious freedom, sought Vatican approval to redirect $57 million toward the maintenance of mausoleums and cemeteries. This move, critics suggest, was a strategic ploy to declare bankruptcy and avoid compensating abuse victims. Years later, in 2015, this financial maneuver was uncovered and challenged in court. During Dolan's tenure, the Milwaukee Archdiocese faced accusations against at least 45 priests, with one reportedly responsible for the abuse of nearly 200 deaf boys. Despite the bankruptcy declaration, a mediation settlement was reached in August 2015, awarding $21 million to 330 victims. However, 240 victims received nothing, creating a divide among those seeking justice. The settlement in Milwaukee marked one of the lowest compensation amounts for abuse victims in the United States. While the national average for settlements stood at $300,000 per claimant, victims in Milwaukee received an average of just $50,000. Many victims were excluded entirely. Compounding the issue, legal battles in Wisconsin during the 1980s and 1990s revealed further challenges. By 1995, the state Supreme Court ruled that the Church could not be sued for abuse cases, a decision influenced by church lobbying efforts. This ruling effectively denied countless victims the opportunity for fair compensation, underscoring a system critics describe as deeply flawed. Adding to the injustice, legal fees from the decade-long Milwaukee bankruptcy proceedings amounted to twice the total compensation awarded to victims. In this story, such outcomes reflect a broader concern about the prioritization of institutional protection over individual accountability and support for survivors. While the Church has often cited financial constraints in its legal defenses, its immense wealth and global influence suggest that greater resources could be directed toward addressing the harm done to countless individuals. Instead, critics argue, a focus on shielding the institution continues to take precedence. In this story, 2 dioceses in Montana recently filed for bankruptcy in response to abuse compensation claims, one involving 72 victims and the other over 400. This decision, which effectively denies full justice to those already deeply harmed, has drawn sharp criticism. Observers note that such a move re-victimizes individuals who have already suffered immensely, casting doubt on the Church's commitment to accountability. For those familiar with the Church's history, this approach is not entirely surprising. Many argue that it aligns with a troubling pattern of prioritizing institutional protection over addressing the needs of its followers. In this story, Timothy Dolan, the former Milwaukee Archbishop, plays a significant role. After utilizing bankruptcy to shield the Church from compensating abuse victims, Dolan was promoted to cardinal, representing America's largest archdiocese in New York City. This promotion, some suggest, was a reward for his ability to save the Church significant financial resources while sidestepping moral obligations. At one point, Dolan was even considered a candidate for the papacy following Pope Benedict's resignation, highlighting the Church's internal dynamics. In recent years, Dolan has continued to make headlines. Between 2007 and 2015, he and the Church reportedly spent over $2.1 million opposing New York State's proposed Child Victims Act. This bill, had it passed, would have extended the statute of limitations for filing civil abuse claims to age 50 and criminal charges to age 28. The failure of the bill to even come to a vote in Albany reflects what many view as a calculated effort by Church representatives and some lawmakers to block reforms that would benefit survivors. In this story, the challenges faced by abuse survivors are evident. Many victims delay addressing their experiences due to the emotional and psychological toll of revisiting past traumas. By the time they feel ready to seek legal recourse, they often find that the statute of limitations has expired, leaving them without a pathway to justice. The Child Victims Act aimed to address this common issue by allowing survivors more time to prepare themselves for the demands of legal proceedings. The coordinated effort to prevent the bill's passage demonstrates a strategy that critics argue is designed to avoid accountability. For many, this calculated opposition underscores a broader systemic issue within the Church, where protecting financial assets and institutional reputation takes precedence over providing restitution to those who were harmed. In this story, the Church's actions serve as a stark reminder of the long journey still ahead for survivors seeking justice and the systemic barriers they face. In this story, the quest for justice for survivors of abuse often seems like an uphill battle, especially for those whose cases date back to the last century. For many survivors, state statutes of limitations have long since expired, closing the door to legal recourse. In the United States, only 4 states have taken steps to extend these statutes, allowing victims a brief window to file claims. However, even these measures are fleeting. In states like Minnesota and Hawaii, where a 3-year extension was granted, the window closed in 2016, leaving many victims without a chance to seek justice. In this story, the response of the Catholic Church to such extensions has been telling. In Minnesota, for instance, the Archdiocese of Minneapolis preemptively filed for bankruptcy in 2015, a move seen by many as an effort to avoid payouts for anticipated lawsuits. Across the nation, dioceses that claim to be financially depleted often prioritize shielding their assets over compensating victims. This practice contrasts sharply with the vast wealth reportedly held by the Vatican, which leaves many questioning the sincerity of these claims of financial hardship. For survivors, this dynamic often feels like a cruel denial of both justice and acknowledgement. In New York, efforts to extend the statute of limitations have faced significant resistance. Advocates for change argue that these extensions are essential to allow survivors the time they need to come forward, particularly given the psychological and emotional toll of revisiting traumatic experiences. However, opponents, including powerful figures within the Church, have successfully lobbied against such measures. In this story, the resulting impasse in the New York State Senate is emblematic of the challenges survivors face. Across the Atlantic, another troubling narrative has emerged. In the UK, a legal loophole has been exploited to deny financial compensation to hundreds of survivors of abuse. Since 2012, a government agency has argued that in some cases, victims as young as 12 were deemed to have consented, thereby disqualifying them from receiving damages. In this story, such a claim is not only legally dubious, but also morally reprehensible. By definition, minors cannot provide consent to such acts, which is why these actions are crimes under the law. Yet, this loophole has allowed some perpetrators and institutions to escape accountability, further compounding the harm done to survivors. The implications of this tactic are deeply troubling. Critics warn that this precedent, if left unchallenged, could spread to other countries, including the United States. In this story, the alliance between institutions like the government and the Church is portrayed as a joint effort to evade responsibility and protect their own interests at the expense of justice. For advocates and survivors, this ongoing struggle highlights the need for systemic change to ensure that those who have been harmed are no longer ignored or silenced. To gain insight into just how depraved the crumbling moral foundation of the Catholic Church and its leaders have become, it's worth noting the work of longtime Jesuit priest, best-selling author, exorcist, that the movie of the same name profiled, and courageous Vatican whistleblower, the late Malachi Martin. In his 1990 book, The Keys of This Blood, Martin exposes his own Roman Catholic Church for all its vile evil, while serving in Rome on June 29, 1963, when a satanic ritual was actually held inside the Vatican's St. Paul's Chapel, a mere week after Pope Paul VI, 1963 to 1978, was elected the new pope. Most frighteningly for Pope John Paul II, he had come up against the irremovable presence of a malign strength in his own Vatican and in certain bishops' chanceries. It was what knowledgeable churchmen called the superforce. Rumors, always difficult to verify, tied its installation to the beginning of Pope Paul VI's reign in 1963. Indeed, Paul had alluded somberly to the smoke of Satan which has entered the sanctuary, an oblique reference to an enthronement ceremony by Satanists in the Vatican. Besides, the incidence of satanic pedophilia rites and practices was already documented among certain bishops and priests as widely dispersed as Turin in Italy and South Carolina in the United States. The cultic acts of satanic pedophilia are considered by professionals to be the culmination of the fallen archangel's rites. In this story, a shocking truth emerges about the dark undercurrents within the Catholic Church, specifically the troubling ties between the Vatican and a long history of abuse. It's revealed that for centuries, the Church has been a sanctuary for those accused of horrific crimes, with a focus on the widespread allegations of pedophilia. Pope Paul VI, in his time, called for a new world order and surrounded himself with individuals who had hidden agendas, including Freemasons who infiltrated the Church's inner circles. Under his watch, there was an unsettling shift as dark forces began to operate more openly within the Vatican. In this story, the Church's history of covering up abuse goes back centuries, as documented in Vatican archives. The allegations stretch back to the Middle Ages, when powerful orders like the Templars and the Knights of Malta were influential, hinting at a deeper connection between the Church and troubling forces. Throughout history, there has been a consistent pattern of silence and protection surrounding those accused of abusing children, with the Vatican at the center of these secrets. The Church, in some accounts, is said to be working closely with powerful bloodlines and influential figures who seek control over global matters. These alleged connections have created a dark nexus, where unspeakable acts are not only covered up, but, according to some, are part of a greater, more sinister force gaining power. In this narrative, it is claimed that the abuse of children has for some become a dark ritual, feeding into this power and perpetuating the spread of malevolent influence. These acts, which involve manipulation and harm to innocent lives, are said to fuel negative forces that shape the world in ways many might not understand. War, poverty, and greed are seen as symptoms of these darker powers at play. In this story, the true threat isn't just the perpetrators of these crimes, but the collective apathy and denial that allow such practices to persist. The silence of those who turn a blind eye is as damaging as the actions of the abusers themselves, enabling these heinous acts to continue unchecked. Adding to this alarming narrative, Cardinal George Pell, once a close ally of Pope Francis, now faces serious accusations in his home country of Australia. As one of the highest-ranking officials in the Church, his charges have raised eyebrows, showing that even those at the top are not immune to suspicion. Furthermore, shortly after Pell left Rome, troubling reports surfaced of a scandal involving priests associated with the papacy, further illustrating the dark undercurrents within the Vatican. These events continue to spark outrage and raise questions about accountability, shedding light on the deep, troubling issues the Church is facing. In this story, Father Malachi's 1996 interview revealed a shocking internal Vatican document, which stated that 1% to 2% of Catholic priests were practicing Satanists involved in ritual abuse of children. Fast forward to last year, when Pope Francis admitted that 2% of his priests, bishops, and cardinals were involved in pedophilia. However, a deeper look into the history of abuse shows an even more troubling reality. Between 1950 and 2010, it was reported that 7% of priests in Australia, or about 1 in 14, were involved in abuse. In one particular order, the Order of St. John of God Brothers, an offshoot of the Knights of Malta that began operating in Australia in 1947, an astounding 40.4% of their clergy members were accused of child molestation. In this story, it's revealed that despite these figures, very few Australian priests were ever arrested or sent to prison. One of the most infamous offenders is said to have sexually assaulted as many as 1,000 children before finally being convicted of molesting 52. At 82 years old, he began serving a 28-year sentence in 1994. However, for every priest who faced justice, thousands of child victims remained ignored, often enduring the trauma of their abuse for the rest of their lives. The psychological scars from these experiences sometimes linger, and many of these survivors continue to battle the demons that were brought into their lives years ago by those who should have been their protectors. In this story, the website bishopaccountability.org, which tracks cases of abuse and cover-ups, reports that 5.6% of priests in America, from 1950 to 2013, were implicated in abuse, more than 1 in 19. Given the greater power imbalance between priests and their victims in many developing countries, it's believed that the rates of abuse are far higher in these regions. On top of that, as is the case with many sex crimes, for every one incident that is reported, there are at least 20 others that go unreported. Considering this, it's evident that the true scale of abuse is much worse than the already alarming figures in Australia and America. The Pope, the Vatican, and various secret military orders, as supposed moral authorities, are accused of hypocritically contributing to a global epidemic, which continues to rage out of control. With world leaders often following the Pope's lead, it raises the question, how much has the Vatican's influence allowed this situation to escalate? In this story, we take a closer look at Pope Francis and the questions surrounding his actions. His past, particularly his time as Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio in Argentina, has been the subject of much scrutiny. When he was interviewed in 2010 about his role in Argentina, investigators found his responses evasive, suggesting that he was hiding information that might have been self-incriminating. Further investigations have revealed that Bergoglio personally intervened in at least 5 cases where he protected guilty priests from being held accountable. His actions reportedly allowed these offenders to continue abusing children until their eventual arrest and conviction. In stark contrast, when the families of victims sought his help to stop the abuse, Bergoglio allegedly refused to meet with them or offer any assistance. In this story, the Pope's track record raises troubling questions. As the leader of the Catholic Church, his role in the systemic issues surrounding abuse within the Church cannot be ignored. His actions, or lack thereof, continue to spark outrage and demand accountability, as many look for the truth behind the many unanswered questions that still linger. In this story, we look back at the time when the man who would become Pope Francis, Jorge Bergoglio, served as the head of the Catholic Jesuits in Argentina during the military dictatorship's dirty war in the 1970s and 80s. During this dark period in Argentina's history, the military junta carried out brutal acts of abduction, torture, and murder, leaving thousands of citizens disappeared. Documents show that Bergoglio, rather than opposing these atrocities, supported the junta's actions. He is even accused of betraying fellow Jesuit priests, turning over their names as well as those of 6 parishioners from the poor slums to the junta, leading to their capture. 2 of the priests survived months of torture, but the 6 innocent followers of the Church remain among the disappeared, leaving a dark mark on Bergoglio's record. In this story, it is revealed that evidence suggests Bergoglio may have made a deal with the military dictatorship. In exchange for his cooperation, which included praising the deadly US-backed regime as patriotic, Bergoglio's position within the Catholic Church rose steadily. His actions, some argue, helped pave the way for his eventual rise to the papacy, positioning him within a system that many see as deeply compromised. More recently, a former Argentine junta official now living in Spain provided sworn testimony accusing the current pope of being a key figure in a massive global child trafficking network. The testimony claims that Bergoglio was involved in running a trafficking ring through Jesuit-run Catholic orphanages, where children whose parents had been murdered were exploited and abused. There are allegations of disturbing cases where pregnant mothers were allowed to give birth only to be killed afterward, with their newborns fed into this network. In this story, as shocking new details continue to surface, it becomes harder for some to ignore the disturbing claims that have been made over the years, particularly those of Father Malachi, who warned 2 decades ago that Satan had a grip on the Catholic Church. Today, the Catholic Church remains the largest Christian denomination, with 1.2 billion followers, but the number of believers has been steadily declining. Many of the faithful are elderly, with 60% of Catholics now over the age of 65. This decline in belief, coupled with the exposure of numerous scandals, has led some to question the true nature of the institution that once held such influence. In this story, Pope Francis and the Catholic Church are depicted as being trapped in a web of corruption and scandal. With each new revelation, more people are starting to open their eyes to the darkness that has long been hidden behind the Church's walls. All of these confirmed facts indisputably demonstrate that pedophilia is the ruling elite's Achilles heel, and the best chance humanity will ever have at taking back our Mother Earth before 90 to 95% of us die as the elite's depopulation targets. Under Satan's not-so-secret banner, clearly a coalition of evildoers in charge have been victimizing children for centuries. Various alt-media factions argue over which group is actually in control or the worst offender: the Freemasons, the Pope, Vatican, Jesuits, Maltonites, the Templars, the Illuminati Satanists, the CFR, Trilateral Commission, the Bilderbergers, the Skull and Bones, Committee of 300, and on it goes. In this story, there are those who point to the influence of a small number of Jewish individuals in sectors such as entertainment, media, and finance. Some believe that certain individuals have used their positions to gain power and control, particularly within political and financial systems, and this perception has led to criticism of their influence over U.S. politicians and foreign policy. There are claims that Israel and organizations like AIPAC exert significant influence over American politics, which has fueled a broader discussion about the role of powerful groups in shaping global events. In this story, one perspective focuses on the Ashkenazi Jews, a group that constitutes a significant portion of the Jewish population today. Some claim that the Ashkenazi Jews, whose ancestry is believed to trace back to areas in northeastern Turkey rather than the Middle East, have no historical right to claim Palestine as their homeland. This belief, however, remains controversial, with many disagreeing about the origins of the Ashkenazi population and their connection to the land of Israel. Despite the accusations, it is important to recognize that blaming the Jews as a whole for the world's problems is an oversimplification, and such rhetoric has been widely dismissed as anti-Semitic and harmful. In this story, the author acknowledges that there is ample blame to go around for centuries of wrongdoing, and that the blame game has often been used by powerful individuals and groups to divide and conquer. The manipulation of society has led to increasing division, particularly in the United States, where political and social tensions are more pronounced than ever. Events such as those in Charlottesville are seen by some as orchestrated efforts to stir up racial conflict, perpetuating division and chaos to further the agenda of powerful elites. Rather than focusing on infighting and division, the story suggests that people must unite against the true enemies, those who exploit and harm humanity for their own gain. These individuals and groups, often accused of being involved in dark practices and crimes, are seen as responsible for much of the suffering in the world. Rather than debating who is most to blame, the story argues that collective action is needed to confront these powerful forces and hold them accountable. In this story, the suggestion is made that forming a Truth and Reconciliation Commission might be a productive way forward, By focusing on uncovering the truth and addressing the most immediate wrongdoers, society can begin to heal and hold those responsible for crimes against humanity accountable. Time and energy spent on unproductive debates should be redirected toward meaningful action, with the goal of bringing justice and transparency to the darkest corners of society. I will send you the continuation of this article in my next email. Best regards, Anon75. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching. Stay safe and I'll see you in our next video.